In election 2020 news, former presidential nominee Hillary Clinton was making fun of Senator Bernie Sanders with Howard Stern.
So here to discuss that and a lot more is the host of the Majority Report, Sam Seder. He joins us now via Skype. Sam, it's great to see you.
Great to see you, sir.
Great to see you guys.
Sam, you saw, as we all did, this epic interview with Howard Stern and with Hillary Clinton. You say one can be agnostic as to the question of whether Sanders' campaign damaged Clinton's campaign or even agreed with her assessment, but it seems irrefutable that it's time for her to stop sowing dissent amongst Democrats. I mean, it seems, she's taking a shot at Bernie Sanders. She's also taken a shot at Tulsi Gabbard. Just give us your reaction to that.
Well, first off, let me apologize for misspelling sowing. It should have been with but,
I fixed it for you. Don't worry.
Twitter fixed it for me very quickly. I mean, look, I really, without getting into the question as to whether Sanders hurt her campaign or not. I mean, look, there were a dozen things that went wrong with that campaign. Any one of them was enough to have her sustain that loss in the general election, or at least in terms of the Electoral College. So it's largely irrelevant. The bottom line is we hear constantly about Democratic unity. There is absolutely no excuse for anyone who considers themselves to be operating in the best interest of the Democratic Party, or frankly, the country at this point, to be taking pot shots at the top candidates in the election, particularly when they have no stakes in it, right? I mean, she's literally just on the sideline. I think if Barack Obama was doing the same thing, we would have the same problem with that as well. Mm-hmm. In fact, I've criticized Obama for weighing in on the Medicare for All thing, if only because a year ago he said that was a great policy. So it's very unhelpful, and frankly, I don't, for the life of me, I have ideas as to why she might be doing it, but she needs to rise above that, and for the good of the country, for the good of the party, stop doing it.
I like your optimism that that's something that might happen. I mean, here's a woman who's floated like 20 different excuses for why she lost, none of which have to do with the fact that she ran a terrible campaign and was a terrible candidate and had the wrong policies that are exactly why people were so disgusted and frustrated with the establishment. But also in this interview, she and Howard Stern, two very rich, wealthy individuals, decided to take shots at free college. Let's take a listen to that.
Bernie Sanders, and this was a perception I had. Mm-hmm. You would say a policy when you were running against him for the nomination.
Right.
And the next day you go, free college for everyone. Yeah. It's almost like when you run for a fifth grade class.
Yeah, right.
I'll give you free everything.
Chocolate milk for everyone.
And more recess.
More
pizza. And then it makes it look like you're a stick in the mud.
I know. And then when you say, well, wait a minute, where's the money going to come from? Then what about, are you against free college? I know.
God forbid you have education or health care for all the citizens of the wealthiest country on the planet.
Well, first of all, it's even worse than that, right? I mean, because first off, it's not the case that she came up with policies, then Bernie Sanders would roll them out. These are policies that he's embraced for literally decades. If you want to criticize Bernie Sanders, on this, the best criticism is he's been harping on this for decades, and we still haven't done it. So that it wasn't a question of him falling. Look, she had a decent platform. I think, relatively speaking, certainly one to the left of where she was in 2008. But she didn't run on that in the general election. I think that was her own failure. And the idea that we can't afford it's not free college for all. It is a free public option in each state. I mean, Joe Biden made this mistake the other day, too, about talking about his son getting paid for at Yale Law School. That's just not what it is. And they know better than this. And they have to pretend it's something different because they know it's a very compelling policy that makes a lot of sense. I mean, look, at one point in this country, we did not have public schools for people. And we offered them to everyone. And there was no argument. Maybe there was arguments at the time, like, how can you allow wealthy people have access to public school? In this instance, we're not offering as much public free college, but we are offering an option. And to poo-poo it like that is incredibly privileged by, of course, both of them. And it's absurd because we know when there's a war, we find the money immediately. And Bernie Sanders has laid out exactly how we would pay for this. So all of the criticisms that were levied there are childish and petty.
Yeah, $1 trillion in Afghanistan, a new Washington Post reporting to show to just lose and just to gain absolutely literally nothing.
Continue to just light hundreds of millions of dollars a day on fire there. Sam, I also wanted to ask you about impeachment. You've taken a little bit of a different approach to this. You're very pro-impeachment than some of the other YouTube communities, so to speak. Why is it that you hold that position? Tell us about it.
Well, first off, I think on a case of just accountability and civics, I think it's fairly obvious, right? I mean, Donald Trump has committed multiple impeachable offenses, and he needs to be held to account. On a political perspective, it is all benefit, I think, for Democrats. It is not motivated in the Republican base, as people suspected it might. I think at the very least, it is fulfilling the desire and the mandate that Democrats had in 2018. They have passed dozens upon dozens. I mean, hundreds of pieces of legislation, about 60 of which are really relevant. The latest of which was a fix on the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act that happened last week. But all of these are going to go die in the Senate. So the biggest political benefits from this are twofold. One, eventually the impeachment will go to the Senate for a trial. And it will mean that there are days when Mitch McConnell is unable to confirm right-wing judges to the bench in perpetuity for their lifetime. And there's been 170 of those. That's more than the Obama administration did in 8 years. So there's that practical and material benefit. And the other is there's about a half a dozen senators, Susan Collins, Tom Tillis, Cory Gardner, Joni Ernst, Sally McAdams, others in the Republican Party who are running for re-election, who want to be able to keep Donald Trump at arm's length. And when they vote to protect him from impeachment, they're in big trouble in those states. And the best chance the Democrats have to win back the Senate, with a lot of senators who I won't be necessarily fans of, but they will be keeping Mitch McConnell from being the Senate leader, happens because of impeachment.
That's an interesting argument. The thing about the judges is particularly interesting. But here's my thing, Sam. Look, I don't think what the president did in Ukraine was okay. I don't think it's acceptable. But it's like number 152 on the list of bad things that he's done, which, by the way, very interesting that the thing that triggers impeachment is when you happen to touch the establishment, when you happen to touch on the sacrosanct principle of foreign military aid. But if we just think about the political cost or benefit, I mean, it seems to me like we're making the same mistake that Hillary Clinton made. She didn't run on policy. She ran on his character. And now here we are going into the critical phase of the Democratic primary. People are going to actually start casting ballots. And 100% of the media attention is going to be fixated on some like Ukrainian bureaucratic infighting for the entire month of January. Sanders and Warren are going to be taken off the campaign trail entirely. No one's going to be talking about health care. No one's going to be talking about wages. No one's going to be talking about climate change or trade or anything else. It's going to be all impeachment all the time. Personally, I think for the progressives in the presidential race, this is a complete disaster.
Well, I mean, you're assuming that in the absence of impeachment that we would get all those conversations you're talking about.
But we were before impeachment. I mean, we had a whole debate on Medicare for all. We had a whole CNN climate change town hall, et cetera, et cetera.
I agree. And those things are still happening to a certain extent. But we also had debates that were dominated by calls for impeachment. Now you have people on the campaign trail. They don't have to deal with impeachment at all. It's actually happening. I agree with you. I think there's another dozen things he could be impeached for. And I know there's an argument that this is, sort of Al Capone with his taxes type of situation. But as far as the claim that the impeachment's happening because of the establishment, we got to remember, Nancy Pelosi did not want this to happen. The reason why it's happening is because her frontline Democrats came back. I think you've spoken to Ryan Grimm maybe about his reporting on this. They came back in August and they were hearing from their constituents, and this is what the constituents wanted. And the bottom line is, like, this race for president, look, I don't think they're running against Donald Trump on impeachment. this is a Democratic primary. I think everybody agrees they would like to see him impeached. And so I don't think that's really the issue there. I think Democrats are 92% on this. So the real question is, what would be happening right now were it not for impeachment? And what we would be hearing is a whole Benghazi-style story that the Democrat, I mean, this is part of the impeachment is, in fact, I think what they were going to be rolling out right now if impeachment wasn't happening, which was a huge conspiracy theory about 2016 that would roll into 2020. You have Bill Barr, who is, I think, one of the most dangerous department attorney generals we've ever had. He's looking for a reason to say the 2020 election is illicit, regardless of which Democrat wins. And so I think this has been a huge, if not boon, at least defensive measure for the Democrats. And I think if anything will take the Senate back, it'll be this.
I'm very skeptical.
An interesting perspective.
Yeah, but
Not
we'll
sure
see.
we agree, but thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.
We'll check on this, Chris.
Yeah, we'll check back
on.
for sure. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, guys.
Coming up, candidate Joe Biden continues to defend both his record and his son's.
Team Rising weighs in on how successful his attempts have been so far when Rising continues.